All right, the one thing that I didn't talk too much about in my notes for section 4.1 was this process of actually constructing a discrete probability distribution. So I wanted to make sure that I looked at least at kind of how to get you started on a problem like this. It's really going to be more review, which is why I didn't put it in the notes, because it's really just a matter of remembering that a probability is the same thing as a relative frequency, right? When you convert a frequency to a percentage. So in a situation like this problem, where I'm given a frequency distribution, right? So I've got, the number of households that have 0 televisions, the number of households that have 1 television. And I want to convert that to a probability distribution. All I have to do is convert those frequencies, the number of households, to a probability. All right, so the way that I would approach that here, the first thing I would do when I see that I need to go from frequency to probability is I would determine the total frequency that I'm looking at. All right, in this case, if I add up my frequencies, I have a total frequency of 2,599. All right, we know we need total to calculate probability. So now notice what happens when you go to construct your distribution. The definition of a discrete probability distribution says you look at every possible value of x, right? That's 0 televisions, 1, 2, or 3. And then you write the corresponding probability for each one. So for example, right here, if I want to know the probability that a household has 0 televisions, I'm going to take the frequency, how many times did that occur? And to get probability, I'm going to divide that by the total. So the probability that I would want to report here to 3 decimal places is going to be 0.008. All right, and I can do that same thing for each additional value of x. All right, so if I want to look here at the probability that a household has 1 television, I'm going to take the number of households that have 1 television, the frequency. I'm going to divide that by the total because that's how we get probability. And I'm going to report that probability rounded at 0.171. So just know when you're asked to take a frequency distribution and convert it to a probability distribution, all you're doing is essentially going from a frequency distribution to a relative frequency distribution. And then all those things that you know from the notes about a discrete distribution, they sum to 1. They all stay between 0 and 1. You can graph it, much like what we did back in Chapter 2. You can use the probabilities to look at compound events, like at least 1. All these things that we did look at in the notes will apply here as well. Now, one more thing that I want to remind you about. So let me come back over here. As you're working through the homework, let me find one here. All right, so remember, when you are asked to find the mean, the variance, the standard deviation of a discrete distribution, there are formulas for this. All right, and if you go to the question help and you do, say, view an example, it's going to show you how to do this by hand. And I did some of this for you in the notes. I did the mean by hand, so that should look familiar. I kind of started the variance. I started this little table, but I didn't do the whole thing because, again, I'm not requiring you to work through these completely by hand. So if you want to use the formula and you want to work through it like what you're seeing here, that is perfectly fine. But make sure that you have watched the full video that I posted for section 4.1 so that you can see there where I showed you how you can put this in StatCrunch and then use StatCrunch to calculate the mean, the variance, and the standard deviation so that you're not always having to do this by hand. All right, so when it comes to like test time, because you did all this by hand in Chapter 2, I will not require that you do everything by hand here. So if you want to use StatCrunch again, just make sure that you do watch that 4.1 lecture video all the way through so that you can see my steps there.